It happens in every fandom. There is always a person or a character that catches your eye. You start watching them, taking mental notes of their origin story and lore, and before you realize it, you are in too deep, and the official story doesn't do it for you anymore. It lacks detail and depth. You can't help noticing how some questions are never answered, so your mind naturally gets to work, and you end up creating your own stories and theories. That's a headcanon. It doesn't matter if we talk about anime, movies or books, every fandom makes its own. But what if I told you there is one fandom where personas are incredibly complex and already filled with lore and magic? Still, with that much information already available, people still create their own headcanons. What happens when you combine deep, established lore with a rich imagination? You get the best stories. That's why tonight I wanted to share with you some headcanons from the Visual Kei fandom. Some stories are fun, even weird. Others are deep, and the last one, it's a really sweet one. Nonetheless, all of them are precious treasures. I hope you enjoy them. While the world still fights to determine if things should be measured in yards or meters, the Japanese internet understood years ago that both ways are boring and inefficient. In the headcanon of many Japanese Bangyas, the Eiffel Tower is exactly 211.53 Hyde tall. Why? What's happening here? How did a Hyde become a unit of measurement for the Japanese internet? Hyde, the vocalist of JILUKA and Ciel, has become well known over the years for his music and his stage presence. Despite his petite physique, he always had a powerful voice. But in the early 2000s, the Japanese internet noticed something strange surrounding him. There was a lot of information available about him, but not his height. That's something both he and his staff always hid, as if it was never intended to become public. No matter how much people ask, they were met with silence. And once you try to hide a secret, the temptation to discover it becomes too great. The users of Nichan took that silence as a personal challenge and began to work on the case. By measuring pixels in all of his pictures, and comparing the ratio of pixels against people whose height they already knew, they soon found an answer. 1 Hyde equals 1 meter and 56 centimeters, almost 5'2". At that moment, the internet exploded and a new legend was born. First, people started making unhinged measurements. A standard dwarf is 1.3 Hydes, and a Tyrannosaurus Rex is clearly 2.56 ones. And later, as if that wasn't enough, it all evolved into a Wikipedia war. What's that, you may ask? People tried to edit the band's page to add Hyde's alleged heights, only to have the stuff constantly deleted. Someone will try to add a hidden paragraph with his heights. The staff will find it an hour later and revert the changes. It became so frequent that admins had to block all access to editing the page. That lasted for a while until people finally moved on. To this day, this phenomenon has been documented for posterity on many websites as one of the most unhinged pieces of Visual Kei history. You know, I'm not a huge fan of internet drama. More often than not, it's too loud and too mean for my taste. And that's precisely why I love JILUKA and Ciel stories. Because every story about them, more than drama, has always turned into something unhinged, but never too negative or too harsh, just wild and weird. After all, this is the band that refused the Visual Kei label for 20 years, something that fans and the press did constantly, as you can imagine. The last time a TV show dared to label them as Visual Kei, they went on the stage, rushed through 2 songs, and left while being clearly upset about it. And when it comes to Hyde's height, It might be a little mean, but it's a good demonstration of the Streisand effect. People love to talk about secrets, and the more you try to hide or censor something, the more curiosity grows, until everyone becomes obsessed with it. Once solved, it becomes a short-lived obsession, and nowadays people don't talk about it anymore. If you ask me, I understand why he tried to keep his Hyde hidden. Everyone is allowed to feel bad about something they can't change about themselves. It's not good, but it's human. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure he felt relieved once this information was out and people got tired of it. Anyway, what if I told you this is only one side of what can happen when you stay silent in the eyes of the public? Tell me something. Have you ever thought about what could happen when you deliberately withhold all information about your life? Not something mundane like your height, but rather something deeper. Your name, your age, and even your voice. Then the internet reacts differently. Let's move on to the next story. One thing is to hide a single mundane fact you don't like about yourself. And a very different one is to craft such a mystique and mythos about your presence that no one will ever know the real person behind the legend. Let's talk about Mana, the genius musician who treats guitars like harpsichords, the fashion designer who changed Lolita fashion forever, and a living doll. Ever since Malice Mizer debuted, every member began to develop a complex stage persona with deep lore, unique musical sounds, and fashion. When it comes to the musical sound, that's something I've already covered before, by the way. You can check that out later if you want. Regarding personas and acting, no one took it as far as Mana, to the point he has maintained a vow of silence for almost 3 decades without fail. No one in a public setting has heard him speak. If he wants to communicate in public, he just whispers his message to a band member or writes it on paper. To this day, you can see in his latest videos with his bandmates how he just gestures while they handle all the verbal communication. Why? He has never provided any explanation. And you know what the internet loves to do in this case, right? In both the Japanese and English communities, we can read dozens of theories. For many, these theories range between black magic, sacrifice, and pacts with the devil. Some even fantasize about him slaving his bandmates with spells. Using what is known about his lore and mixing in alleged interviews and incidents, some portray the supernatural side of things. For others, it's just a matter of voice, claiming that the moment he speaks, he would break the spell of his doll-like feminine appearance with a deep male baritone voice. But the headcanon doesn't stop here. Besides his vow of silence, many people have tried to analyze how he communicates and his worldview. When it comes to language, people have noticed how he writes perfect formal English whenever he chooses to. Not the ESL kind like your humble host here, but the kind with perfectly refined vocabulary and grammar of a very well-cultured gentleman. People have theorized he must also know French, since his world building and lore are rooted in France. And when it comes to his presentation, I could stay here all night reading comments that range from the Onagata tradition to any headcanon possible about his gender views. People go as far as to find his old tweets where he mentioned wanting to be genderless on stage and try to analyze the meaning of each word. If you ask me, that's something beautiful, really. The more you keep to yourself, the more precious theories about you will emerge. Unlike Hyde's, these gaps are impossible to fill. because they are deliberate pieces of lore and acting. Theories like black magic are fun in a sense, and also probably not true. But unless you can bring a Catholic exorcist into a concert, they are difficult to disprove. However, since Mana is an Onagata, I'm surprised he has never spoken in public consciously. In the Visual Kei tradition, Onagatas are fine sounding with deep male voices, and the contrast is charming. Seeing people like Hisaki with his princess-like appearance, having a deep voice is something people are fond of. Maybe that's something he doesn't like. In the old Japanese tradition, Onagatas often train their voices to develop a very characteristic and theatrical feminine voice, rather than focusing on developing a sustained, healthy, and conventionally female-passing voice like many transgender folks often do. They train to have a theatrical one that could fit the persona perfectly, something that sounds fine on stage, and okay for talking for short periods of time without dealing with physical damage to the throat, despite being an aggressive technique. It's more similar to conventional voice acting in that sense, like anime seiyuu but embroidered within a very rich and wonderful theatrical tradition. Anyway, we may never know the true reason for this one. Maybe it's mystique and mythos behind the persona. Maybe Mana doesn't like his own voice. Or maybe it has something to do with black magic. Good fun nonetheless. Louis deceived those around him under the guise of a witch hunt, allowing her to remain by his side as a mortal. Yet, unable to defy the vampire blood coursing through his veins, he ultimately yielded and drank her blood. Louis had turned his beloved into a vampire. With this, they would be spared from the eternal pardon of death, but it came at a terrible price: the emotion known as love within her heart. And so, the card time falls on the forbidden romance between vampire and human. That was an extract of Camillo's own lore, written and published by him, because some not only showed their lore but stated clearly without leaving any room for doubt. And when that happens, the internet, more often than not only accepts it, but helps build it. It's the case of Camillo, the Vampire Prince of Exiles, an artist whose works are deeply rooted in an alternative French universe he himself documented through an extensive set of writings, one where the French Revolution took an unexpected turn, and a young vampire heir to the throne was able to escape death and ended up moving to Japan. It could have stayed like that, just lore, but here the internet decided to make it a living history. First, people started to look at what they called physical evidence, noting how, since his era in La Reine, he hasn't physically aged. Even in his pictures with little makeup, he still looks way younger than he should. This prompted people to comment online that he's the best looking 50-year-old vampire. However, one thing has changed since then, something that people have trouble explaining. Most of his songs are about eternal love, blood, and roses, but at the beginning of his career, he had a light tenor voice, and today his voice has evolved into an incredible range, from light baritone to high tenor, as if he were a completely different person. That might have a rational explanation, more on that later. The internet here had a different reaction because, unlike Mana or Hyde, they weren't secrets surrounding him, just his lore supported by his music and the history surrounding him. Since then, many people have spent time documenting, translating, and even expanding the lore from his early days, and for many, rather than a piece of entertainment, it became canon. They looked at his history, then at him, and decided it just made sense. I love this one, and each time I go online and see comments like that, or people tracking down weird pieces of French history to support his lore, I can't help but smile. That's the kind of healthy lore and mythos any performer should strive for. Stating things through how you look and how you act, and letting people feel in the rest by your side. Magic that's created through acting and collaboration rather than forcing things out, which often feels weird or can spark Wikipedia wars. But what's with his voice? This is something that people have mentioned for years. His work during La Reine is very different from his work in Versailles and his current solo project. In fact, he sounds like a different singer. So, did he actually transform into a vampire? The answer is less magical, but it's precious. I remember reading a recent interview where he revealed the secret without being asked directly about it. Ever since he moved to the US, he has been working with multiple vocal coaches. The truth is that despite achieving fame and recognition, and having an incredibly successful musical career, he has never taken anything for granted. Instead, he just keeps training to become a better musician, a better singer, and a better music producer, even by seizing any chance he has to meet American musicians to keep learning. To be able to expand his range over the years, and to keep working every day, that's amazing. This person has already played live with the people who inspired him to pursue a music career in the first place, being symbolically placed that night at the same level as the people he used to look up to. He has toured worldwide, has sold tens of thousands of albums, and has become one of Visual Kei's most prestigious acts. And still, he keeps doing his best every day. I don't know if he's actually a vampire or if his body is immortal. Truth is, he hasn't aged a little since he debuted, but I can tell you his heart and soul truly are. Deep respect. X-Japan, the band that gave hope and a fun family to the Japanese delinquent youth of the 80s and 90s. After they disbanded in 1997, they left a void for a whole generation that grew up with their music. What followed next were years marked by tragedy, Toshi being brainwashed and held captive by a terrible cult, the death of Hyde, financial disputes, all sorts of problems. And somehow, against all odds, after all of that, they came back to the States in 2008 after a reunion between Yoshiki and Toshi the year prior. To this day, they still play and fill whole stadiums with people who used to be dismissed as society's lowest, making them remember their youth and fleeting freedom. Since then, Yoshiki promised they would end up releasing a new X-Japan album soon, and year after year he doubled down on that promise, saying the album is almost finished and that people will love it. Thing is, I'm recording this in 2026, almost 2 decades have passed since that promise, and to this day, there isn't a new album. Why? What's going on? According to the internet's headcanon, there are many answers, but the general opinion skews toward 2 ideas. The first one is about perfectionism. Yoshiki being obsessed with control and wanting to make a masterpiece to honor the band's legacy. The other one is a bit darker. As many state he's withholding the album as an emotional lever to keep people engaged with the band and with him, arguing that once the album is released to the audience, no one will have a reason to come back, so he gives hostage instead. Let me put my foot down on this one. I believe this one is terribly wrong. I understand the line of thinking here, and while Yoshiki may have a hard personality and be a perfectionist, I believe this is a very different issue, a very sad one for that matter. There are 2 types of music bands. The ones where 2 or more members contribute to the vision of the band as a unit, and the bands where one member is the mastermind behind the music and world building, and the rest of the members are just there to help carry that vision, not to create it. The first kind is where most bands fall. Pretty much all the members are involved in designing the sound, world building, and lyrics, and each one brings in what they've mastered. This is where a guitar player would be in charge of just the guitar arrangements, then the bassist arranges his part and the drummer brings his own signature style. Everyone puts in a piece of their craft, and they create something as a whole. From lyrics to arrangements, it's a collaborative effort. The second kind is where pretty much one person is in charge of writing the music, making the arrangements, programming each virtual instrument, and designing the whole atmosphere. While that person may not do 100% of the job, pretty much all the vision relies on them. The rest of the band acts as instruments to make that vision come alive, rather than to add their own inputs. This is what musicians like Mana do. In his current band, he pretty much writes everything, and the rest of the members make that come alive alongside him and his mind. He even relies on other vocalists rather than singing himself, as he realized even vocals are just another instrument, one that also happens to carry a message. What's the problem here? X skews towards the first kind of band. Even if Yoshiki is the main composer, problem is, Hyde, the lead guitarist, isn't here anymore. If you listen to any ex-Japan record and then go listen to Hyde's solo projects and pay close attention to the guitar, you can see the sound is really similar. I don't mean the actual guitar tone, well, I mean that too, but rather how the guitar arrangements carry his signature style in both projects. Hyde sounds like Hyde, and that sound is embedded in ex-Japan's DNA as well. Even if he wasn't the main composer, you can still see many similarities to the point one could think he was the one arranging many guitar parts and adapting them from what he was handed. In my very own headcanon, Yoshiki is very well aware of this. You can bring another guitarist to the project and make him write and arrange music along with him. In fact, Sugizu is an amazing musician, there is no doubt. But the result won't be ex-Japan as we know it. Even if the album is labeled as that, it would sound like a different band. The spell will be shattered completely. Probably Yoshiki wasn't aware of this when he made the promise. Maybe because he was just too excited about their comeback and now it's too late to retreat. According to Yoshiki, the album has been almost finished for a while now, and he has even released some singles under the ex-Japan name in the past years. But just singles, something that isn't meant to be as big a contribution as an album, nor does it hold the same symbolic weight. That's different. If someday this album finally sees the light of day, it will become a new era for the band. Not better or worse, just a different one, and that's scary. And speaking about eras, those aren't just fixed time periods because there is always one era that everyone has experienced at a different time. That's the beginning of a journey. What happens when you set foot in a scene for the first time? Many step inside carrying their own fears disguised as urban legends and headcanons. That's what happened to a young Japanese rural Bangya about 2 decades ago, at the moment of attending her first Visual Kei live. For her, this was a very special opportunity, as people in rural areas often don't get many chances to experience much of any kind of scene. Most of the time they just silently enjoy what they fell in love with. And when the day came, she was nervous, terrified that something could go wrong. This is her account. At that time, an urban legend called the Safety Pin Squad was rampant on the internet. It was said that there was a group at live concerts that would stab fans they didn't like for having bad manners or looking uncool from behind with safety pins. That's simply assault. Frightened by such rumors, I look up concert etiquette on the internet, wore my best clothes from either Algonquins or Peace Now, and wore black rubber soles I bought with my New Year's money. However, since I was naturally barefaced, no matter what I did, I looked like a country bumpkin. Around the venue, there were many cosplayers and women in punk/Lolita fashion that I had seen in videos of Yokohama and Budokan, and it was a feast for the eyes. That's because there was a rumor about why Visual Kei bands didn't come to Shizuoka easily. The rumor was when Diran Gray held a concert in Shizuoka, the fans' energy was bad, and Kyo, the vocalist, got angry and sang with his back to the audience halfway through. This rumor has no source, and thinking about it now, would a professional really do that? But as a pure person back then, I believed this rumor just like the safety pin squad one, and I desperately tried to liven things up by my own standards, so that nightmare would continue to come to Shizuoka. Beautiful, isn't it? To be young and try to fit in. I have been this girl, you have been too. Don't look at me like that. We all have been this girl at some point. You know, as someone from the rural side, this one goes straight to my heart. This may show my age a little, but growing up, I didn't get many chances to experience any kind of alternative subculture in general, and I rather spent many hours reading on internet forums, finding music and bands over email, falling in love with a range of bands and subcultures from afar. As a matter of fact, the stories I bring you from night to night are the ones that, after many years, still hold a dear place in my heart. And while I was reading her story for the first time, I couldn't help myself. She made me remember when I was 18, finally got my driver's license and had the chance to attend the lives of some of the bands I spent years watching over and over again on a screen. I was as scared as she was, even a bit more maybe. Not only did I feel like fish out of the water during concerts, but also, back then, I used to drive a rusted Citroën with more than 500,000 kilometers just to go to the city's venues where bands played. Surprisingly, that thing never broke and never left me stranded. Great car! Even if years later I got myself something nicer, I still miss it. In retrospect, I think we all have been in her place, self-conscious about not fitting in the first place, deeply scared because when something matters to you, it suddenly becomes so fragile you don't want to let it fall. You just want to protect what's precious to you, even if that means creating your own monsters in your head and believing everything others say. That's why I believe tonight's stories are something precious, don't you agree? Behind each story there is someone like that girl, like you and like me. Someone human, letting their own imagination go wild, for good or for bad. Someday, if I'm able to gather into this anime castle a small group of souls, I would love to make a submission forum to ask you for your headcanons and do a second volume of this video featuring them. I hope someday we'll be able to do that. That would be really fun. Until then, I'm V and I've been your host for the night. Wait, don't go, wait. I'm no JILUKA fan. In fact, I'm a 51-year-old alcoholic/addict who somehow stumbled onto the darker side of TikTok while going through withdrawals from 708 this last week. What I am is a professional musician. I became somewhat interested in this band. Boogie needs to learn how to play bass. He can only play on the lowest string. He's an amateur at best, and barely that, I'm sorry. Senna is accomplished on the guitar. They use heavy backing tracks, and depending on the venue, the mix can be very hard to get. And sometimes, if musicians get tired, they will lip sync during a performance here and there to get a breather. It's more common than you think. So, this is still a talented band who puts on a good show, and that's all that matters. Well, maybe I'm a fan. Let me see when I finish puking my guts out from quitting again. Don't do drugs. No refunds, kid.